Sorry, there was a little technical difficulty there. I think I know a good many of you already, but I guess if you don't know, there's a little background. I started as an environmental scientist at LDEQ, and I was there for almost 12 years. I've been at Providence about 8 years. My background is water and water quality. I did a lot of permitting, TMDL compliance, implementation, criteria, water quality criteria calculations, things like that. So.
And I'm Amy Colleen. I've been at Providence for going on 13 years. Like Yvonne, I was at DEQ before that in water quality, doing mixing TMDL stuff as well. And Yvonne and I have been doing that here together at Providence for quite some time now. So we'll go ahead and get started. Oh. Lots of moving parts here. Lots of pop-ups. Thank you, Chandler. And we haven't practiced this, so it's just, it's going to be fun. We plan on having fun. So DEQ adopted ammonia criteria in 2020, or that's when they finalized it. They public noticed it earlier in the year, kind of on the down low. Didn't really, say too much about it. Of course, they're not technically required to. It was in the state register. And, we got a public notice via email, but there was not a tremendous amount of outreach to the regulated community over it. But it is final. And once a criteria is final, DEQ is absolutely obligated to implement it, no matter kind of what their feelings now are on the criteria. And Yvonne, you want to talk about kind of like how we got here, because this was done as a result of EPA promulgating updated ammonia criteria as well.
Right. So I guess EPA updated the criteria in 2013, but they had looked at criteria back in 1999, and there was a 2009 draft. And they looked at toxicity tests, a variety of toxicity from various years, from like 1985 to 2012. And they're like identifying how to calculate the criteria, what's most affected. It looks like, invertebrates like mussels and things are the most sensitive species. And it seems here that this is where they discovered that pH and temperature that's what affects it. But again, the criteria, there was a 1999 criteria, there was a 2009 draft. The 2013 is where they looked at all of that data, and they still came up with the same concept that pH, the criteria is affected by pH and temperature mostly. The mollusk are the most sensitive species there. And DEQ subsequently in 2020 adopted that 2013 criteria for Louisiana waters.
So in other states either have adopted or in the process of adopting criteria as well. I don't know that EPA has like a firm drop dead date when you have to, but eventually, as part of funding mechanisms, every state will have its ammonia criteria implemented into their regulations. Some states are needing more time just because they know that it's going to have a huge impact on their dischargers and their watersheds. So, every state's kind of taken a different approach to it. So I guess what does this mean? We've dealt a lot, if any of you guys are familiar with TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, and have gotten more stringent limits. Ammonia nitrogen is considered, but that's, and you have to kind of go back to high school and college science here, but when we could talk about ammonia from a dissolved oxygen perspective, we're talking more about the nutrient ammonia. Whereas when we talk about the ammonia criteria, we're specifically talking about NH3. That is the toxic component of ammonia. Once it converts to NH4, not as toxic, so not regulated. And that's why pH plays a huge role in this, as well as temperature. But kind of what it means is right now, from a permit perspective, is as permits are coming up for renewal, anybody who discharge any industrial facility or municipal facility over 100,000 gallons per day that discharges at or above that level is required to turn in ammonia NH3 data with their application, and DEQ is grabbing that and then screening it determine what the limit should be, and then screen it against water quality to see if a permit limit is needed. So I think we skipped ahead of ourselves here. But anyway, so again, LDEQ is screening all the permitted discharges to determine if ammonia limits are required. But there's several steps necessary to determine if a limit is warranted. And there's a lot of different information. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have a webinar, is to educate you guys on what your options are, because you can use, in some cases, you can use effluent data, you can use ambient data. Where does the ambient data come from? Can you as a discharger collect ambient data? Absolutely. How is DEQ getting their data? We just want y'all to be educated and know when to ask questions, so that, if you get a stringent limit, and some of these limits are really stringent, that you have other options that can go ask for different conditions to be considered. So Yvonne, you want to hit on how it affects LPDES permitting?
Yeah, I guess to some extent, how it changes what I guess you probably have seen in the past. The first thing is that you typically probably were seeing either there was a TMDL out there and you had the 2.4 kind of monthly average daily maximum limitation for ammonia to begin with, or you may have something higher depending on where you are. Or you may just technology wise, they may have considered a 2 and a 4, depending on the size, the volume of the flow coming out. However, now what they're doing is basically they're going to screen. And what happens is they calculate a water quality criteria, like Amy mentioned. There's a few different varying ways, but they calculate this water quality criteria, and then they screen your 2, 4, whatever your limit is, to determine if you need a water quality base limit. And what we are seeing is, especially for large facilities on a small stream, with a low critical flow, what we're seeing is limitations that are absolutely unachievable.
Yeah, some of them have come out like 0.1 for an average, which of course we know is really unachievable for most conventional wastewater treatment systems. But there are some things we can consider for low flow streams, depending upon the size you can discharge. I see a couple of you on here that discharge into big water bodies. Lucky y'all. Y'all should really not either not get a limit at all. It should screen out, just because the dilution is enough to where you shouldn't get a limit. Mississippi River, Calcasieu, Ship Channel, some of those areas, Chafalaya, those water bodies are large enough to where, the impact is very minimal. They're going to do the calculations, but hopefully it comes up to where you guys don't need a limit. It is really those dischargers on the lower flow streams, which is a lot of our small municipalities are going to fall into this category. Their sanitary discharges are into, the local water body, which doesn't have a high flow. And Yvonne and I are going to show y'all some of the calculations here in a second, but like she mentioned earlier, the criteria is not like a number in the water quality standards. There's no, it's different on every stream. So again, it's not like you can go and say, oh, look, the regulations say the criteria is 2 for my stream. That's not how it works. They have to actually do a calculation, and that calculation is impacted. What the calculated criteria number is impacted by pH, and that's your primary driving factor, temperature, ambient temperature, and then the flow of the stream. So again, what we're seeing is what DEQ is going to do is they're going to default to going back to their ambient data systems, their ambient data collection network systems, and they're going to go find the closest one, and they're going to use that information when they determine what the criteria is for your discharge. It could be a mile away, it could be 10 miles away, it could be on another stream if the water body you discharge to is not the named water body for that subsegment. So again, pH and temperature, those are pretty easy things for you guys to go do. So in anticipation of this being done, especially people on smaller streams, it probably behooves you to go collect some ambient data. If you don't, you can go on DEQ's website and find the nearest ambient monitoring station to you. So if it's not close, it would be a good idea to get background ambient data that you can give to the agency to say, hey, yeah, I see you're getting an 8.2 pH on this stream, you know, or on my stream 10 miles away, but look, we've gone and collected data. This is what the pH is at the, you know, right upstream of where we discharge, because pH really is, like we say here, and we'll show you in a minute, the driving factor for what that criteria number is.
I will say too that something that we didn't mention, and I see Kevin on the up here on the screen, is that this is for freshwater water bodies, so not marine water bodies. So I know some of like in the Calcasieu area are discharging to marine water bodies. This is not applicable necessarily to marine waters.
Yeah.
So
it's not as toxic in the marine environment as it is in the freshwater environment.
So we want to escape or go down.
Do we have another slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So next steps, again, just understand that when you submit your application, the next go round, DEQ is going to do these calculations. We've been having meetings with the agency, just a group of consultants and facilities and the DEQ technical folks to figure out, you know, how to make this happen in a realistic manner. You know, again, DEQ a little bit backed themselves into a corner by not including the regulated community in this rulemaking, because, you know, they assumed it wouldn't be a huge economic impact. And it absolutely can be a huge economic impact to, you know, small communities for sure, where, you know, hey, who's paying for us to now meet a 1 milligram per liter, you know, ammonia limit? That, you know, they just don't have the money. They're going to have to, you know, pass it on to the taxpayer and go figure out how they're going to get the money to either upgrade the system to meet it. So again, you know, they're going to screen it. There's a couple different things that you as regulated facilities can do. We'll go to the next slide real quick. You know, a 3-year compliance schedule, obviously, you know, that's part of the Clean Water Act. But in addition to that, DEQ's plan right now is to undergo rulemaking to push that back even further. They want to delay implementation. You know, the calculations at the end of the day are still going to come out the same, and eventually the limits will have to be put into every permit. They just are trying to go get more time to implement it, to give, you know, you, the regulated community and regulated facilities, the time to figure out how you're going to comply with it if the limit is super stringent for your discharge. You know, the one thing that when we work with facilities, you know, the overall kind of general feel is municipal wastewater dischargers, specifically, industrial is a little bit different. You know, conventional systems typically can meet a 2.4, you know, nationwide, worldwide, that is pretty much so, you know, I'm not going to say a given, because not all facilities can, depending upon the type of treatment you have, but can meet a 2 average for, what is it, weekly average?
Yeah, it's a weekly average.
Or a daily max, depending upon if you're municipal or industrial. So, you know, that's kind of our goal, and DEQ is trying to get there with everybody's limits. You know, how can we get them the highest limits? So like we're saying, it's going to be dependent upon your facility flow, the receiving stream flow, the pH, and the temperature. And we're going to kind of show some scenarios here, the differences between, you know, if you have a large discharge into a really small water body, there's additional considerations that can be made. And you'll get the compliance schedule. They're going to ask for some more time to implement it, which means they shouldn't be putting it in new permits. But in the meantime, what that means is they can't issue new permits unless they have it.
Correct.
So they're trying to undergo some pretty quick emergency rulemaking to get that done, to give you guys more time. I think that's it, but Yvonne, do we want to?
Yeah, the next slide is questions, but we're going to go and look at these spreadsheets. I have a couple of them open. We'll start with the criteria spreadsheet. So as Amy mentioned, the first thing they're going to do, or DEQ is going to do, is pull ambient data. And now these, I have here the 75th percentile for temperature and the 50th percentile for pH. This has come through DEQ and these meetings that we've been having with them, and them looking at other states, what they do to try to get the best, something they can implement, which is in accordance with their implementation plan and the regulations, but get the best pH and temperature that works with the actual criteria calculation. So this on this specific is the ambient data for the freshwater criteria. So it pulls the ambient data for temp and pH, and then it calculates a total ammonia as total ammonia nitrogen, acute and chronic criteria in milligrams per liter. And over, I have it converted to micrograms per liter, specifically what we'll show you in the water quality spreadsheet.
So what we kind of want to show you here is if the ambient data came back at 8, now I'm gonna mess up your calculation here. Oh,
You shouldn't.
we have to enable editing first.
You
Sorry,
don't have to
guys.
do that. There. Now you can edit it.
So if we come here and change this to 8, the limit's going to increase.
Well, the
Decrease. The criteria
decreases.
decreases. Correct.
Yeah.
So again, this is what goes back to making sure you have the best ambient data possible for your facility. Because if you got, if you get this down to 6.5, the criteria goes up quite a bit. So when you're talking pH, and I know some of you we've kind of talked to in some of the facilities, pH adjustment is a little bit easier in some instances than adding an extra 2 days of retention time within your wastewater treatment system. So one of the things we've talked to DEQ about is say, hey, look, right now my pH limit is 6 to 9, but what if I agree to a pH limit of 6 to 8 or 6 to 7 and do some pH adjustment? At the end of the day, we're still accomplishing the same thing. And we're converting the NH3 to NH4, and I get a higher limit. So that's one of the things we've talked to them about, and they seem amenable to it. Again, they haven't done a lot of implementation yet, so we're not sure how that will pan out. But again, this is why it's important to have site-specific data for your facility. If you can, go get it close to your discharge upstream, it'll tell you a better story whether you're really going to have a problem. If the ambient pH is 9, your limit's going to go down pretty acutely. The other thing we've kind of talked to people about is, within your system, can you adjust pH? If you have a lagoon type system, you have a little more flexibility to do some pH adjustment in the lagoon. And what that does is just convert the NH3 to NH4 within the lagoon. And there's some facilities just going through all this in Missouri that have successfully done that in lagoon systems. And again, pH adjustment is a whole lot less expensive than it is to, the only other traditional way to reduce ammonia is to increase retention time within your treatment system. So, if you have a quote unquote activated sludge package plant, that almost means having to put in a whole new other system, almost exactly like it, which is very costly. So again, we can show you over here temperature, let's just change that to, 28. It really, it's not nearly the impact as changing a decimal place in your pH on the what the criteria calculates out to be.
When I want to mention here too, because we talked about, large flow on a small stream specifically. So I have here criteria effluent here that where we've calculated with effluent data, and you can see the calculated criteria is lower than that low pH or the 50th percentile pH and the temperature there. But when we go and look at the water quality calculations, because it's effluent dominated for a sense, they get a higher flow. So it's better to have these lower criteria and a higher flow than it is to have that higher criteria.
Yeah. So, and again, if you discharge to a small stream, effluent dominated is defined by the implementation plan as your flow being greater than 50% of the stream's flow. So if you discharge to what DEQ considers a no flow stream, which means in the 7 days over a 10-year period has no flow in it, the most conservative approach, you're what we call an effluent dominated stream. And in that particular type of case, when your effluent is the primary flow of the stream, you can ask DEQ to use your effluent pH and temperature as opposed to using ambient pH and temperature. And they've been pretty adamant that you have to actually ask for this. So again, it would help if you guys, go do that little evaluation. What is your facility flow versus a receiving stream flow? And if you're effluent dominated, start grabbing. You should have temperature data, even though you don't report it to DEQ on your DMRs. Every time your sample people take a sample, they're recording a temperature. So go pull your temperature data. You probably have it already. You have pH data for your effluent. So if you're an effluent dominated stream, there's a little more flexibility that you can ask for as well.
So this next spreadsheet, there's a lot on it. Some of you have seen it, some of you haven't. We'll talk about ambient though first. This is a critical flow, and DEQ, if you don't know, if the flow is less than 0.1, they always go with 0.1. That's the default critical flow that they'll use, and harmonic mean is 1. In this case, we're talking about critical flow though. So down here towards the bottom of the screen, there's ammonia. I have in here is 2 is their ammonia. And you can see this is the criteria I had with that 6.75 pH and the 26.75. This is what was calculated. And over here to the right, I go over, there's where it calculates a limit. These are in micrograms. So you can see the limit here is 2.5 for a daily max or a weekly average, and 1.1, I guess, for a monthly average. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a lot of data. I mean, again, I kind of wanted y'all to see though, basically there's a higher criteria here. We got that. We have a lower pH. We have that. But if you were effluent dominated, you would get ultimately, I'm looking at a higher flow. So instead of 0.1, I have 0.77. I still have the same input of the 2 for the ammonia that we have there. We have a lower acute and a lower chronic criteria.
But when you do add the flow into it, the numbers come out higher, right? So you get 1.6 and 3.8.
Or 3.9. You're getting close to a 2 and a 4, closer than I can get you with the ambient. So if you're effluent dominated, that's certainly something to look at. And again, you can adjust the pH. So we probably could get that criteria a little higher. But again, it's something that you can see with the numbers, and we can play around with any given amount of numbers to figure this out.
And again, the one thing we wanted you guys to know is it's just math problems. And it depends on what you put into the math problem. It's going to give you a different answer. So be sure and feel that you have the ability to ask DEQ to do the math a different way, or to use different numbers in doing their math, because it can be done, several different ways, and several different considerations can be taken into account. They're going to default to using their own data from the nearest station, not your data, not data you've collected, unless you ask them, or unless you say, hey, look, I have this data. They're not just going to say, hey, this is an effluent dominated stream. Let's do these calculations a different way. You have to say, I'm an effluent dominated stream. Can you do these calculations another way? Again, they've pressed that, very much in the meetings we've had, that you're going to have to ask for things to be done a different way. So again, empower yourself to go ask, is there another way to do these math calculations? Can we work with this to get a limit that we can, probably meet without having to spend a lot of taxpayer money? Yeah, let's go back to not quite so much math here at 10:30 in the morning.
I don't know why it went to the beginning. Why did it go to the beginning?
So if y'all have any questions, absolutely, we can either let people ask, we can unmute, or you can put it in the Q&A.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know why it started wherever it started.
That's okay. There we go.
There we go. So if you guys have any questions, you can unmute yourself or ask it in the Q&A box, or raise your hand and I can unmute you if you guys aren't able to.
I'm pretty impressed that we did that in exactly 30 minutes. We did very good.
And they understand everything because they're not asking any
That's
questions.
right, that's right. You did a
Or they're
great
just
job.
like, that was a lot of math.
They're probably still like trying to get past this whole Excel spreadsheet.
So if y'all have any questions, again, you can ask now, but feel free to reach out to Yvonne or I will certainly help you.
If you don't have our emails, it's up on the screen now for y'all.
One, let's see.
Okay. How do I find if it applies to your municipality? If you discharge more than 100,000 gallons per day or 0.1 MGD per day, it will apply to your facility. So everybody over 0.1 MGD or 100,000 gallons per day is who they're screening.
Yeah, and Evelyn, I'm not sure where you're located. But unless it's a marine water, then I would assume that it applies at over 100,000 gallons a day.
You know, and again, it's a good idea for you guys, even if you don't sample your effluent for ammonia right now, go take some samples just so you know where you are before even turning anything into DEQ. You know, you're not required, you have to turn it in when your application comes up for renewal. But if it's not in your permit as a condition right now, then go ahead, sample for it, see where you stand. What could you meet?
She's with Franklinton. So
Okay.
that's definitely fresh
Yes,
water.
yeah, you're fresh water and they're gonna screen y'all. So
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Franklinton's over 100,000 gallons
Yeah.
a day. So yes.
yes.
Glad you guys could make it, Kevin and Andrew.
Yeah.
And everybody else on there. It's great to have y'all.
Yeah. Like we said, feel free to shoot us an email or ask us a question. We'd be happy to answer. And again, I want y'all to know that y'all can ask DEQ questions. Can you do this differently? What can we do? That's the big thing is, don't just kind of accept what they put in your draft permit or your preliminary draft as the only way it can be done.
All right, does anyone else have any questions? We'll give like 1 or 2 more minutes. All right, it doesn't seem like anyone has any more questions. Again, as a reminder, we're going to record this session and we'll have it uploaded to our website under the resources tab. Our website is www.providenceeng.com. And I can also email you guys a link to the recording so y'all have the information, as well as Yvonne and Amy's email address if you have any questions you think about later. I guess that's it. Anybody have anything in closing?
We're good.
That's it. All right, well, thank you guys. We appreciate you guys taking this. Oh, she said, please do. Sorry. We appreciate you guys attending our webinar. And again, check out the recording on our website for, I guess, for reference or if you have any other questions.
Y'all have a good day.
Thanks, guys.